Welcome everybody to SCORE Southwest Missouri's Tuesdays at 2 webinar series. We do this every second and fourth Tuesday of the month. And our webinar for today is Get Psyched for UX, Improving Your Website to be Customer Friendly Through Psychology and Heuristics. We have our presenter with us today, Theresa Smith, who's the Senior Manager of Optimization at Search Discovery, and also Kelly Wortham on with us, who's the Practice Lead for Optimization at Search Discovery. Before we introduce them, I am going to tell you just a little bit about SCORE, little info for our webinar today. My name is Katie Pattison. I will be one of your moderators today. I'm the workshop chair for SCORE Southwest Missouri. We also have with us Charlie Evans from Christian County Library, who is our sponsor today. Love to have you introduce yourself in the chat if you would like. We'd love to know who you are, what you do, and what you hope to get from this webinar today. This webinar will last about an hour, including time for questions at the end. You can add your questions anytime in the chat or in the Q&A. And everyone who is registered will receive an email within about a week of the event that includes a recording of the event. And I think we do have some handouts today and cool white paper. Theresa and Kelly will talk about that during their presentation. You'll also receive an evaluation email from SCORE. If you have a moment to fill that out, it just takes a minute or two. We would love for you to do that. That helps us to plan for future workshops. Let's learn a little bit about SCORE. So SCORE is a nationwide nonprofit that is there for you for the life of your business. SCORE offers mentoring and resources to support you from idea to exit. There are 3 ways that we want you to remember that SCORE can help you. One is by providing free business advice and mentoring. So you can request a SCORE mentor for free. SCORE mentors are volunteers from our community with business expertise in a variety of areas. And there is no cost for that service. You can do that at score.org. We also offer low or no cost business training, just like the workshop you are in today. Here in Southwest Missouri, we do this on the 2nd and 4th Tuesday, and we usually have an in-person workshop as well that we're working with the Springfield Greene County Library on. SCORE also has an amazing library of business templates and resources on the website, which is score.org. So whatever information you're looking for your business, probably got something to help you out. These are some of our upcoming workshops. Our next one is June 14th, which is library tools for your business. I don't know if you know, but the libraries in our area have some amazing databases and resources that can help you with your business. I am the presenter for that one. We'll talk about Springfield Greene County Library resources, but lots of other libraries also have resources. That's 2 p.m. on the 14th. The one after that is creating a business website that brings customers in. I know we may have some crossover audience in this one. That will be useful. That's with Johanna Uchtman from Growth Kit Digital. That is an in-person workshop. It's the 21st at 7 p.m. at the Schweitzer Brentwood Branch Library. And we have a very cool bonus opportunity from the library for that. You can get a free headshot from Brandy Keltner from BG Studios. Will be there doing free headshots. We'll have sort of a networking and snacks and opportunity to get a really great headshot. If anybody was at the SCORE E3 Women's Conference last year, Brandy did free headshots there and they all turned out amazing. So you can show up and that's not going to cost you anything to get that headshot. You can sign up for that one beginning June 7th by calling this number here on the screen. That's the Schweitzer Brentwood Branch Library, 883-1974. Everything that SCORE does is made possible through the effort of our volunteers nationwide. So we have over 10,000 volunteers serving clients in over 1,500 communities. I am a SCORE volunteer. Charlie is a SCORE volunteer. We've got all kinds of ways you can participate in SCORE, and it's a very cool way to kind of get connected in our Southwest Missouri community of entrepreneurs. Here's our contact info one more time. If you'd like to be a volunteer, you can fill out that volunteer application at score.org/volunteer. You can visit our chapter website at swmissouri.score.org, where you can register for any of our upcoming workshops, request a mentor, all that good stuff. And I will turn it over to Charlie to talk about our sponsor.
The Christian County Library is proud to support this SCORE workshop. The Christian County Library has many resources and solutions for small businesses. We can help businesses identify consumer and market trends, provide self-paced technology trainings, space for meetings, free Wi-Fi, and notary services at every branch. Come visit us at one of our 4 locations in Ozark, Nixa, Clever, and Sparta for your small business needs. Today, our main speaker will be Theresa Smith, and Kelly Wortham is here for additional support and answering questions. Both of them are from Search Discovery. I will turn it over to them so that they can introduce themselves. Theresa.
Hey, I'm Theresa Smith. I'm actually located up in Wisconsin, coming to you today virtually. I've been working, and there's an introduction slide when we get over to my presentation in a second. You'll see some more fun facts about me, but I'm excited to be here today and share some of my knowledge.
And I'm Kelly Wortham. I'm in Springfield, Missouri, with a lot of you that are here today, which is how we made the connect. Teresa's going to be your primary speaker today. She specializes in this area of UX and research related to that. So I'll hand it back over to you, Theresa, so that we can get started.
Let me bring up my screen here. Can everyone see? Yes.
Looks good.
Awesome. And it does look like we don't have a massive crowd. So Kelly, if you see questions come in that are slide specific, please pause me, stop me, and we can definitely address as we do those. Awesome. So get psyched for some UX. As I said, we're going to talk a little bit about introductions. I'll introduce myself a little bit further. Give you an overview of what is heuristics. I know several years ago I had never really heard that word before, so hopefully I can give you a better understanding of how we're using it and why we're using it and what it actually means. Then we're going to talk a little bit about designing for viewing. How do people look at your sites? What accessibility things do they need? What are things to keep in mind as you're building out your website? And then we'll get into more of the nuance about psychology principles and what you can do to further enhance those viewing items that we've already kind of covered. And then ultimately, just because it's so vital for so many small businesses, and everyone kind of has some best practices in using forms and fields on your site. They're just really actionable, easy to take with you kind of go-dos. So as I said before, I'm Theresa Smith. I'm an optimization senior manager at Search Discovery. I've been doing this for 13 plus years. It's hard to believe. And I have run the gamut from just digital analytics, looking at the nitty gritty of your numbers, to full on optimization. And how can we make your website better? I've been at Search Discovery now for just over 3 years. It's been a really fun ride working and learning from Kelly and our team. But prior to that, I spent over 5 years working at Kohl's Corporate, actually, helping build out and optimizing their websites. So taking a look at how they could improve their customer journey, what elements stood out to people. And during my time there, my favorite fun fact of it is when I started, it was just a couple $100 million business, and that's not anything like too small, but by the time I left, we were a multi-billion-dollar online business. So it shows how those small improvements can really kind of move the needle in places. Also, I can't stop without talking about the fact that I am a mom. It truly does define me. It's part of my work-life balance, everything I think about, and I think it gives me a great approach to the way I think about websites, because I have a little bit of that holistic view. But I am a program manager, cruise director, and chef, also known as mom to my 3 small children. You can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. My email is there as well. If you have questions at the end, you'll see a similar slide at the very end that'll have more of this information. And Charlie and Katie alluded to it, but we also recently wrote, and I was one of the co-authors of it, this white paper on some great ideation, go-dos, how can you think of better ways to improve your website, document white paper. And so there's a link right there. It'll show up a few times in this presentation if you didn't get it down quite yet. So heuristics frameworks. If you've heard the term before, some people think, well, you can read minds, you know what people are going to do, but there's actual science to this. So heuristics, they are simple, efficient rules people use to form judgments and make decisions. They are generally founded in research. and they are able to be these best practices. That's kind of the most simile word you can think of around heuristics. When I talk about heuristics, as I said, they're based in experience and research. We also generally tend to group them into these little areas. So we have that categorization of best practices. You may have heard, researched, or looked at UX best practices and come across the Nielsen-Norman group. They're pretty common. You may have heard of the rule of thumb, which is often applied to mobile websites. So when you're scrolling or making buttons, making sure that they're thumb-sized and not going to be too small or too big. When we talk about psychology, we're going to get into some of those specific principles, biases, how we can reduce cognitive load and things that can add to it. Neuroscience, the dopamine and cortisol, I think is one of the most common one. It's about how can you reduce stress on the people, and also relates heavily to those psychological principles that we'll go through. Social proof is often considered a best practice, and we bucket it under marketing, brand, and sales. But you may have also heard of the conversion hierarchy of needs, which is an expert opinion, or there may also be some prior knowledge within your organization that is just considered tribal knowledge, case studies, past experiences. All of those are heuristics. So everything I kind of mentioned here is some type of heuristic that you can use to apply logic, reasoning, experience, or that research to coming up with better ideas. There are some pros and cons, though, to looking at heuristics. So generally, it's supposed to be void of influence and personal opinions and preferences. It should hopefully reduce some of the bias when you're looking at a website by talking about this from a research kind of oriented mind. It's fairly easy to scale. You can look at one page, you can look at a whole site. Cost effective because it really is just someone who's doing it. Doesn't require any additional tools, as you'll see. We'll go through several of them here today. And it can be done pretty quick. And when you get into some of the psychology principles, I'll show you some sites side by side, and you'll get a really idea of how repeatable it is, how you can see what's good, better, and best very quickly. Some of the cons, though, this does not directly display anything that your customers might think. So if you have a really defined segmented group of people, not everyone may agree with the heuristics that you're putting out there. It can highlight some problems that may not impact all your users. So what is a best practice around form fields? As I mentioned, we're going to go through that a little bit. You may have a site that has no forms or a form that's never used. So you may never really need to do any improvements or apply things there. So you might identify a problem that's not really relevant. You do need to know a little bit more about what you're looking for, as I said. So you need to identify where your problems are and how you can do it, and try to find ways to work around them. And it only identifies general usability issues. Doing some type of usability tests or talking to your customers is going to be the best way for you to figure out, is this a real impactful thing? Is this a meaningful thing to my customers? And then the other side of this, best practices are always evolving. It's what keeps me in business, right? The fact that I can keep looking at what's going on, that I can keep acquiring research and changes. As I said, I've been doing this for over a decade, and what site experiences looked like 10 years ago is nowhere near what site experiences look today. So some of those best practices that existed then are definitely not in play today. So designing for viewing, this is really just to set the stage of the elements of your page that you want to consider as we go into those psychology principles. So we're going to cover visual hierarchy, viewing patterns, the copy and imagery best practices, and some reminders for accessibility, just so that all of your customers have access to your sites. So visual hierarchy, I'm sure most of you have kind of already heard that terminology. It's really used for how you want to rank and design elements and influence the people who are looking at your site. And we've looked at a lot of different things. So how you see color and contrast, right? How can you use that? Considering color saturations, bright colors, meaning things are more important. Less saturated colors generally means something is less important. Warm, bright colors generally indicate something like a warning or an error. So, you know, you want to keep all of that in thoughts when you're thinking about color and contrasting. Using too many colors might get a little bit too overwhelming for the eyes. It's common in a lot of designs to really only limit your colors to 2 primary and 2 secondary. You can kind of see that on the right-hand image from Williams-Sonoma. It's really kind of this like grayish white and then this bright red, right? What draws your attention, what doesn't, where you see things, where you don't. Effective designs often use different treatments for their headers, subheaders, and body text. That also kind of feeds into scale when we think about it. So how big of a font you use for something, how bold it is it underlined? What are some of the elements that are going to stand out more? Best practice for you to take away as a tip is not to use more than 3 sizes, this small, medium, large kind of range. And obviously your most important things you want to capture would be the biggest. You also don't want to just rely on color to communicate visual hierarchy. It goes again back to that scale piece, because people with color blindness might not be able to differentiate. So if you use all one size fonts and you're just trying to highlight keywords, it might get lost on a certain percentage of your audience. And then the other one, when we talk about visual hierarchy, is generally where we're grouping the items. What sort of proximity and common regions are we using to divide up our page? I took this home, it's a mobile shot, you know, of a website, and it kind of looks and it says, okay, here's your banner, here's your big call out about your sale, here's what you're gonna do next. And then don't forget, it's Cyber Monday, it's a big deal. So they're using all of those elements, but they're also creating a blocking system to their page, so it's very friendly to the eye as it's kind of going through. All right, next. You may have also already heard and seen this about viewing patterns. You know, users scan. We don't read everything. I think even when I read novels today, I don't read every word. I get the gist from a sentence and kind of move forward. But eye tracking studies have been really kind of a key component in understanding how people are looking at site. And there's this 80-20 rule where 80% of the people are absorbing what's going on the left side of your page rather than the right side of your page. And they've really broken it down into 2 different patterns, viewing patterns that are out there, this F pattern and Z pattern. The F pattern was talked about for a really, really long time. And just now, I think in the last couple of years, we've heard more about the Z pattern. F being the best for content heavy text pages. That is kind of like the old school way of a lot of website development, a lot of the initial things that made the internet as great as it is today. So we think about F pattern pages with blogs, news platforms, editorials, things like that, compared to that Z layout. I see a lot of B2B actually websites utilize that Z pattern. So something big in this hero image kind of slides down, and then you get a little bit more of a fun image with some context and text. And it kind of like really draws your eye in that format. Obviously, some of the most important things is that the top left corner gets the most attention and is first and when they land on your site, and then they move down from there. And people do scroll, but obviously you still want most of your content above that fold. So it's important to think about that too. Is this within your laptop screen? Is this below it? Where is the most common screen usage that's looking? And you don't want to try to squeeze everything in there, because we do know that people scroll, but just get the most important things up at the top. I think this kind of like feeds directly into that thought process. And this is obviously a hero image for Trello at the top. And iQuant did a visual priority study. And then one of the things that they said was that first impressions inform in less than a second. And the logo is one of the site section that gains the most amount of attention from users. And people generally spend about like 6.5 seconds on this area before they move on. So having a clear logo, an identifiable logo, is one of those visual imagery best practices. having that clear hierarchy that you can also see what's in priority 1 zone, what's in priority 2 zone, and what would be in that 3rd priority zone to draw the eye. So that dominant headline, and that the eye tracking study observed that big headlines most often draw the eye first upon entering the page, especially when they're in that upper left corner, which is no surprise. Best practice is to present a complete value proposition within that headline, and keep in mind that clarity would trump persuasion. So people knowing what your product offering is, knowing why they're there, would be better than having a really catchy, witty line and people are like, huh, did I land in the right place? So large, high quality imagery is another one that makes obviously a first landing on a page most appealing. Image quality is a significant factor in drawing attention. And one of the things that this example doesn't show, but actually there's been studies that have said forward-facing humans have also been proven to catch greater attention rather than like a profile, people doing stuff over here, or something like the image that's up on the screen that doesn't really involve any human interaction. And visibly bigger introductory paragraphs improve attention, but you obviously want to make those introductory paragraphs bold-faced or in a larger font size than the rest of your text. So 95% of people who see those do generally view that secondary priority zone and do at least scan it to get a pretty good catch of what's going on. Any questions on this zoning? I thought this zoning pattern was really cool when I first had read this study. All right, we'll move. So my last part I want to make before I dive into the fun psychology piece of it, which I'm really here for, let me be honest, but making your site accessible. This is a really important out there in the world. We want to make sure that all of our customers have access to our digital entities. And there are some really important things to consider. If you can't consider all disabilities, at least consider blindness. 80% of accessibility issues are related to blindness. Remembering to create good alt text or text that describes your images is key. It's often where some of the readers get stuck. And also remembering, if you have a mobile site, to tag your hamburger menu as menu, because a lot of screen readers would otherwise skip over them and people wouldn't know where to kind of get into. Don't place important content out of the way where the screen readers won't find it. You really kind of want to think about how screen readers go through, which is just line by line, top, left to right, top down. And best practice is to test the accessibility with real users. So if you have an opportunity to do some sort of user testing, really get it out in front of that audience, or just even downloading the software yourself and trying to do it. I had once I went through an experience where they literally blindfolded us to experience that. So you could have an idea of, if that was just being read to me, would I know what action I would want to do next? Some people in the more recent years have started to disable some of the zoom features on mobile interfaces, which is obviously another element of blindness or having sight disorders. People want to be able to zoom in, read the fine print at times. Different phone sizes. I think about my mom. She uses a really old Apple and it's quite tiny. And then I look at mine that's almost like a small tablet. That's going to show up differently on our two different phones. Accessibility is cheaper when it's done up front, and it is easily learned. If you try to go back and correct a site, that's obviously going to cost more. There's going to be a lot more QA, a lot more things that need to happen, versus as you're building out your site, this can be very forward thinking. You don't necessarily have to go back in time. And you really should embrace the all access attitude that includes how people are accessing things on mobile devices. You don't want to lose out on a customer just because you didn't really have that ability. I also think it's important to note that the US government actually has a site up there to talk about what are some of the best ways to do that. That is www.usability.gov. And it talks about why you want to have more accessible, gives you some more data around the number of disabilities that are out there, ones that you want to focus on. And then obviously there are even certain industries that have certain regulations assigned to accessibility. So being aware of that as well is kind of key. All right, this is the fun part of the presentation, I'm not gonna lie. And I hope you think it's as fun as I do. These are the 7 principles we're going to dive into. Obviously, there are a ton more psychology principles out there. I even have more in a back pocket if you're really interested in learning about this. But these are the ones that I thought would most pertain just into the general public, honestly. And they're some of the easiest that you can apply to your websites. So I'm going to start with the von Restorf effect, also known as the isolation effect, and it's an element in building a visual hierarchy. So we kind of talked about that before, what a visual hierarchy is, but this is really giving the most crucial elements the greatest prominence by standing out on your page. So that using that combination of the several dimensions to aid in the processing of the information. So that color contrast, that size, the position, the shape, and the proximity as well to other items is all going to make things stand out one way or another. You not only must a page be well organized so that it's easy to scan, but the prioritization of information and the functionality ought to mimic the real world usage scenarios. So don't make the most commonly used items the furthest out of reach, and use the isolation effect to really make them stand out. So we most often see this, obviously, is in CTAs. What actions do you want people to take on your site? We see them brightly colored. We see them stand out. They're kind of saying, "Look at me," to kind of catch their attention. So my examples on this page is obviously Amazon. Everyone's familiar with it. But really, Amazon pages are pretty sparse. And then you get this bright yellow and this bright orange button over on the right about buying now and adding to cart. And then the same thing kind of with this is a makeup site where even on hover over, it actually changes color and it makes you then, kind of identify it more. Obviously, the bright pink is there, but then when you hover over it, you're like, oh, I know I'm on the right one because now it's changed to white and it stands out even further. Other places that you might see this out in the wild include those notification bars. So I first pulled this together several months ago, and obviously COVID-19 was a really big deal. Also, the Bucks had just won the championships, and as I said at the beginning, I'm from Wisconsin. So I liked this slide and this choice in particular. But the rest of that page is blue and teal and white. Well, let's get a bright yellow bar in front of your face so that you know exactly what the update is that you need to acquire right there. And then conversely, we've talked about how to make things stand out. This same effect or this same philosophy can work on how to hide things. So Nordstrom's is the example on the right, and how monochrome that page is. It really keeps the attention. So by keeping everything else in this black and white, the product images that are up at the top really stand out and really draws your attention there. Another way, which I think is really important for small businesses or B2B actually, would be, although Netflix is also B2C and they're using this same philosophy as well, is drawing attention to a particular plan to kind of upsell. So Netflix does it as pale red, bright red, get the premium. And we see the same thing kind of over with Box. Their starter business and enterprise saying, hey, business is the most popular, the most common. So they're using both the coloring bar to say most popular, to tag it, to pull it out. They're using visual hierarchy of putting it centered and having the other two kind of placed further back, so that you can really highlight and say, oh, this is the one I want. It's isolated from the others. The next one to cover is serial position effect, and that's the propensity of a user to best remember the first and last item in a series. Technically speaking, this is comprised of two parts. There's the primacy effect, so that first item listed, and then there's the recency effect, which is the last item listed. And we often see it used in navigations in particular, with the top links listed first and last. So primacy are things that happen first, typically the most important item because they influence what happens next. And the theory behind this effect is that it's considering an item by itself, it requires a comparatively small amount of processing effort. So it should be pretty like systematic. It should be pretty, just what you would naturally think would be there. So that when you do process that 9th item on a list, you're also processing those previous 8. So, you don't have to put a lot of effort into that first one, but as you start thinking about what all your other choices are, I often think about it when I do a call center and they're like, these are your following choices. The first one, our hours in operation. Second one, if you want to reach XYZ, if you want to look in our directory, and you're thinking in your head, okay, I want 1, and then you continue to listen to your other choices. You have to remember what 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth are. Which one is your best choice. That's kind of no different in the way that we actually process what's on a website, except there's some visual elements obviously help us with our recall. Likewise, recency are the things that just happened, are most relevant and most clear in our brain. They're the representation of the now. And so the theory behind this one is that the items at the end of a sequence are easier to remember because of our working memory. Part of our short-term memory processes the conscious and immediate perceptual information and preserves them first. So best practice in summary is to put the least important items in the middle and your most important on your end. Additionally, not kind of detailed out here, but you can kind of pair this with Miller's law or the magic number law, which says the average brain can handle 7 things at a time, plus or minus 2, meaning the most a navigation bar should really look like is 5 to 9 items for that cognitive load piece. How else do we see this used? Obviously being first in search results, right? We want to be at the very top. We want to be able to catch people's attention. We want to know, that's why we pay for the search ads, the search space, all of that great stuff. Another way is if you have product assortments, you can definitely think about doing featured items first, things you want to sell, things you want to push through. Put them at the very top. You see this from Amazon, that they not only have sponsored links that are in that top row, but at generally the first product, first item on a search results that they have this available for, they actually do featured from our brands because they want to push their brands before even anyone else who paid. The next one is intrinsic cognitive load. So this is the difficulty associated with a specific instructional topic and really wanting to make sure you have both copy and micro copy that work together. So in general, in website design, we want to minimize the cognitive load to maximize usability. And the total cognitive load, or the amount of mental processing power we need to use a site, affects how easily users find content and complete tasks. It really should be second nature. So these examples are some of the best practices of doing null results. But could you imagine if you logged into your Ticketmaster account on your phone, you thought you were supposed to have tickets there, and you get to My Events and it's just blank and it says nothing? You're like, did it not load? Am I not logged in? You might start running through all these reasons as to why it's empty. Instead, let's provide a headline and some micro copy that really kind of supports what the user should do next in order to resolve this situation. So, Ticketmaster is the mobile image all the way on the right. And so it's saying you haven't purchased any tickets for any events. Do you think you did? Hit refresh, right? Or the same thing with Airbnb. When you're ready to start planning your next trip, click here to learn more. I think actually some of the better usage of this is on my next 2 slides about it. This might be my favorite slide in this whole deck. We have Pixar, Lego, and a car shopping website. And the ironic is the car shopping website's actually doing it the best, despite the fun imagery that's on the other one. But 404 errors fit into this same cognitive thing. So Pixar is saying, oh, don't cry, it's just an error page. But they don't tell you what else to do. They just leave you there. And so most likely you're gonna hit the back button, perhaps you'll leave the site, but they're not driving you forward. Lego does it a little bit better. Oh no, you hit this big 404, at least you know what type of site and error you've hit. And then they provide one little button that says start shopping. So at least it gets you moving forward. But really the reason why the car company and selling is doing it best in this scenario is they still have the fun, witty kind of saying for the type of business they are. We sent you the wrong way. Whoops. Let's guide you back. They do both. They're sending them in two separate kind of directions of what would be most likely what the person would choose to do next. So head to the car chooser. That's how you find their products. It's kind of similar to the Lego start shopping, but they also say go back to the homepage. If you just need to reset, maybe this is not at all where you meant. Maybe you were trying to find a blog or some sort of article around something. Here's the other alternative. So really getting that good communication of why you're here, you hit the 404, but then what can you do next to kind of resolve it? And this is another really actionable item one that I think you can take with you around intrinsic cognitive load is around search results. So good, we're unable to find what you were looking for. You didn't just get 0, you didn't get no message. It says, sorry, they're apologizing for it. They're recognizing that it wasn't there. And we're showing you 8 results that you might be interested in. Better was actually Macy's is the middle one here. And they're saying, we couldn't find a match for your search. Check your spelling or try a different search. So we want you to find what you're looking for. We want you to be able to get the item that you absolutely want, but maybe we're just not matching it appropriately. Try different terminology. And then best is actually, I think it's Pottery Barn at my bottom. And it says, sorry, there's no results for this rocket ship that I misspelled. Try using broader search words, fewer keywords, double check your spelling. Also, you could search by product number if you have our catalog, and then they give you that search bar right there to do it again. The other two did not, the search bars were kind of like off. They were up in that right-hand corner, which if you remember from our visual slide, is really in that third portion of where our view is, versus keeping our eyes in that primary zone. Here's a search bar, go at it, do it again. The next one is Hick's Law. And this one I'm sure you've all heard. The more choices, the harder it is to pick something, and the more processing time it takes for a user to synthesize the options to align to which one is best. So this is what Barry Schwartz calls the paradox of choice. So one of the ways to kind of simplify this, make it better for the users to really kind of make sure that you're getting everyone the best experience to interact, is remove your personal nice to have and focus on the necessaries versus the good information. So a lot of these I hear about when we're doing surveys. So collecting information on organization size, or so if you're trying to collect lead information, and you may say, what type of organization do you work for, and or what industry even, right? And you might list out 20 or 30 industries, when really once you get that list, 6 industries would really work. You'd filter 5 into each of the categories. Or what size? You know, do you have less than 50 people? Do you have under 500? Do you have under 2,500? Over 2,500? What buckets make sense to the way you might change or do your business versus necessarily what you need to know? So minimize those choices when response times are critical so that you can decrease the decision time. You want to break out complex tasks into smaller steps in order to decrease that cognitive load, and avoid overwhelming users by highlighting recommended options. So you'll see a couple other examples. So obviously form fields is one I've talked about heavily here, and that makes sense. But if we think about it, if you have product selections out there on your websites, or even libraries of information, how can you filter? How can you break that down? How can you group that information for your users? So TIBCO has a resource library, and they give you multiple filters that you can use to narrow those search results down and down. Pre-populating search is another really popular way of employing this, this law in particular. You start typing something and you might be able to immediately identify what you're looking for to give you that narrow results. And then obviously, as I said, from a retail perspective, product filters, I only want to see things for women in a particular size and a particular color or a particular style. The next one is the law of proximity. And this dictates a lot of how and why we often lay out our web pages. The differences between the bad and the good at the top might seem subtle, but as you start to think about it and look at it more and more, you do realize that the one on the right is far more appealing to you. You know, the logo is in line with the navigation bar at the top. The hero is not off center. I know if I had originally loaded that bad site, I'd wonder, ooh, did it not fully load? Is it still processing? You know, what's kind of happening? We tend to want to look at things in a grid functionality. So when you are designing your site, think about that grouping that we kind of talked about earlier in the visual hierarchy and group them in a gridded-like format. So a common usage is designing your page layouts in that format. What's the latest? Where are your reviews? Thinking about grouping your different types of content. But how else is it used? I think this is a really great example in terms of navigation. This is something everyone has on a site, big or small. But the more links you have, the more overwhelming, as we learned before, in that cognitive load. So how can we reduce that? How can we group things together so we understand? How can we give color, spacing, and hierarchy to make that law of proximity stand out even further? So clearly identify those main categories, and then which ones are the subcategories that fall underneath them. So Scary Mommy's doing it with color and a slightly different size between their main categories and their subcategories, versus on the right with the mobile layout, right, we're collapsing those subcategories into the major categories. Another one of this, which is form-based, and we'll obviously talk about forms more a little bit later, but how can you break your form into digestible sections? Even if it is a Google form, there are ways to separate out what's happening, pages worth of content and information, but it's a little bit easier to digest all of this is address, this, or, you know, this is billing information, this is shipping information, this is maybe gifting information that you might need, or this is information about you, this is information about your company, this is information about what you're hoping to get from us. Whatever it might be, grouping things into those sections just make it a little bit easier. Then a common example I use is if you do think about that checkout process for a retail related site, there can be up to 6 fields associated with just entering in your credit card payment information, your name on your card, which could be 1 to 3 fields. Do they just your full name, or do they break it up first, middle initial, last name? What's your credit card number? What's the expiration date? What's the CVC code? Up to 5 fields for addresses. So your address line 1, 2, city, state, zip. And that could be for both billing and shipping individually, not to mention fields for coupons, gift cards, or other types of payments. That is over 18 fields that I just walked you through, which can seem like a daunting task to a user. But if we start to break them out into smaller, again, this is for shipping, this is for billing, this is for mailing, people start to have a better idea of what they're doing. The next one is Jacob's Law. And users spend most of their time on other sites. So you should make your site pretty similar to others. We generally in my world talk about doing comparative or competitive analyses to try and get ideas for how to improve your site. And it's not just because you want to know what the latest and greatest thing that people are doing out there, but also because, you know, if they're researching you and your products or your things, they're most likely researching and looking at those other sites as well. And the more familiarity there is across them, the easier it is for them to find the information on your site, or to have that ease of transference of knowledge. Oh, I can compare this to this, and then truly make an educated decision. And familiarity comes from the consistency of moving from site to site. So The example I have here are different recognition of buttons. When are things active? When are things inactive? When are things turned on? When are things turned off? So, you know, disabled check marks, radio buttons and switches. Which ones are in play? Which ones can you engage with? Which ones you can't? You'll notice that those are pretty common across multiple sites. So keeping that in mind, that universal knowledge as you move away. But how else is this used? And this is kind of an older visual, but it still plays true. In fact, I don't think many of these websites have changed in the last 3 years, at least not their header portion. So these were the top five websites viewed in 2019 collectively. And one thing you will notice as the commonality is it has logo, search bar, login information, logo, search bar, all your personal information, logo, search bar, continues, even just your general Google search form, right? You have your login information over here. People view these websites daily. So they're used to these design elements. So how can you put them into your website? Well, a lot of our major retailers are definitely doing that today. So they are also very similarly structured. But again, another thing that they think about is adding the shopping cart directly next to their My Account information. So you having log into My Account on your left and your shopping cart on the way on the right of your screen is going to be very incongruent to what they're used to seeing anywhere else. Actually, even putting your account information to the right of the shopping cart would be incongruent to some of these big retailers that people are visiting every day. So Amazon, Office Max, Lowe's, Kohl's, Nordstrom's, and honestly, I could have pulled any one of the top 100 retailers. They probably all look exactly the same. This is one of my ultimate favorite, and from an optimization standpoint, this is where I've seen some of the biggest movement in test results for very little design change. And it's based off of dual coding theory. And so it is that idea that both verbal and visual information travels through separate channels in our brain, and it creates these separate connectivity or forms of stimuli to identify a particular object. So if we can activate both coding methods, so reading or verbal and visual with some sort of iconography or picture, your brain can connect the dots faster as to what they need to do, what they should do, and what is key information. So a common usage, and we've tested this a couple different times on a bunch of different websites, different industries. So I've done this everything from banking to healthcare to retail. The idea of putting an icon next to the key points, almost like the icon serving as a bullet for the information you want to pull out. We have seen lifts and gains and moving to the next steps of their funnels. So, you know, in mail with a message, search little light bulbs to talk about smart suggestions. Or on the right, that's a Nordstrom site again, where we talk about the little card means gift messaging. The little box means you can get a DIY gift kit. It means the next time I come back to this page and I want to know something about the products being offered, I can just quickly glance at it and I might recognize the words or I might recognize the image, but either way, it's going to make the connection in my brain a lot faster. So that is the best practice to capture and present information in both the verbal and the visual formatting to enhance your recall. And you should be making sure that you are using still the right words, being a little bit jargon free, and that it is associated with your audience. We did one for an airline that's very big, like branded, and they were using all of their branded terms, which resonated with like current users and people who are very familiar with the brand when we did a UX study, a user experience study to kind of match with it. But people who are newer, people who weren't members of their loyalty program, things like that, they did not resonate with that jargon and language, and they missed out the opportunity to convert because they didn't have it. So making sure that that information is still relevant and on point is also obviously key. So how else is it used? You're telling, product showing and telling. It's one of those like basics of sales benefits. So what goes on, what goes in, explore this, press this button. So this one actually on Envision site is as you roll over these different elements, it actually interacts and pops up a new like information about what's going on here. So that's that show and tell aspect of their product sales. And another one would be using videos as well, people talking through that verbal, as well as showing you what the actual product is of usage. So if you do have some sort of way of communicating through video, that's a great point to add to your site. And I have 5 minutes left, and I do think we'll be able to get through this pretty quickly, especially because you now are experts, right, in all of those psychology principles. You will see them called out while we talk about forms as well. So one of the things that you would do to reduce cognitive load is through labeling, right? Have a label. First principle. I think that's pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised if some of the sites you wander to and they don't exist. Avoid using your label as your placeholder, because sometimes people click into it and they're like, oh yeah, what was I supposed to write in here? And it disappears the second you click into it. Don't use all caps. You're not yelling at your customers. Keep it nice, but you don't want to also use overly friendly jargon. Keep it short, keep it relevant. So just some visuals of bad practice versus alternative or good practice. These apply to some of those psychological principles we just talked through. You want to provide as much clarity as you can through structured fields. So match your field length and your structure to the input. So we talked about that credit card example before. Put it all on one line, that law of proximity. This one line is where I'm entering my code, my expiration date, and my CVC number. Form fields should look like form fields. Again, that one should be a pretty obvious one, but sometimes you just see a line that kind of blurs into the background and you're not 100%. That's that isolation effect. Make sure they know where they should click to make the next action. And using the appropriate input types. So you don't want to put a comment section that's a single line. Instead, you want to give them enough space, or you don't want to use checkboxes, which means you can generally pick multiple items when it's really a radio button, yes or no, black or white. That goes back to that Jacob's law that we talked about. Are these the common fields that people are used to encountering, or are they going to be like, wait, can I select both yes, yes and no if the article is helpful? And you may be able to get people who are able to then check both and really mess with your data on the other side as well. Best practices with your field layouts that reduce confusion. So we already talked a little bit about being in line and how the law of proximity kind of plays into that. But make sure that those fields that logically go together should be in line and grouped. So, you know, we have state and then zip code is above city and state. That only works if you're going to have a pre-populated field after that zip code. But in general, we think of those three things as kind of going together. So keeping them all kind of in line and breaking up where you might be. Contact information, personal information versus contact information might be different things. And we also talked about this in terms of the Hicks law. So present checkboxes and radio vertically, because it's easier for them to digest the content and choices that are there. And if you have less than 6 options, show them all rather than doing some sort of drop down. Again, it's how the brain can process things the fastest so that they can get through those questions. Because you see, I'm sure, a lot of drop off in your like survey completions. Error prevention and messaging obviously reduces mental stress. So instead of it just continuously reloading and you don't really know what happened or where it went wrong, especially if you have a multi-field form, saying something like an email already has an account and omit unnecessary fields. That also goes back to Hicks law. If it's not something that's going to help the customer complete the task or you to change the way you're going to market or address them, it's probably not a field that they need to be filling in that moment if the idea is to keep pushing them through. CTAs, make your action buttons task specific, submit versus sign up. And buttons should be differentiated from field. You don't want people to think that it's all the same. This again also goes back to that isolation effect. What am I supposed to do where I am? So quick recaps, if you need a reminder or a reference, I got you. As Kelly mentioned and Charlie mentioned at the beginning, I have a couple of handouts that are, you know, you could pin them up in a cubicle, have them easily referenceable of what are the different things that we talked about today. And as I also said earlier, if you want to learn more, check out this white paper. We talk about a lot more heuristics, but also a bunch of other different methods in order to do that. And if there's nothing else that you take away today, I hope that when you think about your designing for viewing, think about your layout, think about how your users are absorbing the content, and address as many accessibility issues that you can moving forward, just for that ease of usage. In terms of the psychology principles, reduce stress and cognitive load by following simple principles and execution to increase awareness of your elements on your page. So draw them to the attention where you want them and kind of make everything else monochromatic so it kind of does not stand out. And forms should be intuitive and follow a lot of those same psychology principles and be similar across sites. And I literally ended right on time.
You did great. We have one question in the Q&A about CAPTCHA. I'm realizing those who are visually impaired won't be able to use that with ease or be able to use it altogether to confirm they're not a bot using our website, which I heard Cloudflare say over 40% of total internet traffic is actually bot traffic. So it's definitely a problem. What are the ways around this so that people with any disabilities, deaf, blind, or other, can still use our website and confirm they are a human without challenge?
This is a really good question. I'm also not sure I have a great answer for you today. Definitely one we could take back and do some research on. I do believe there are some readers that still can read some of the CAPTCHA, or they have like the read aloud functionality for the typing in and following through. But in terms of alternatives to that, it depends on how big and how much traffic you have kind of coming to your site. I've seen people do other text verification as a form field if they're smaller and simpler, and that's just something they can omit at the end. But Kelly, I don't know if you have any additional insight on that one.
You know, just that I typed a quick answer in there about CAPTCHA itself. I know CAPTCHA and a couple of the other ones, I can't think of the name of it, but the one that like does the swirly thing. All of those have embedded in them accessibility options for people who are at least visually impaired. And then there's hearing impaired ones as well. So you can like play the, for the people that are visually impaired, you can play the sound, and for the people that are hearing impaired, the visual ones should work. But they should have those all embedded in there, and you are not incorrect about the percent of traffic that is bot traffic. It's actually increasing, not decreasing. And I think that 40% number is old. So important to check. Do you all have any other questions that Theresa can help answer? And again, I did post, somebody also asked that we post the white paper link. I did share that in the chat, and it will also be sent in the
slide deck.
Slide deck that we're going to send with you. Another question came through. How can we select the type of CAPTCHA so that it's not the less disability friendly ones, like choosing the right photos, or ones that don't have a word to be read aloud? And another question, some CAPTCHA are using 3 boats or 3 buses out of the 9 images, which is true. Theresa, do you have an answer to that? Because I think we would have to research it.
I think we'd have to research it. I do know sometimes when I get the multiple images, it does say if you need an alternative. So, I mean, I do think they have, especially, I would imagine if you looked at the CAPTCHA site, they probably have a whole section, or if we researched it there, but we could definitely kind of come back with a quick answer in the slide deck when we go to share it out. We'll do some research for that for you guys.
Shelley says, information is extremely intuitive and makes complete sense. However, this is the first time I've ever heard of it. Oh, well, excellent. Glad you found it useful. And, you know, as you look through the deck that Theresa's gonna, or I assume, does that come from you, Charlie, or from you, Katie? The email?
It'll come from SCORE, yeah.
It'll come from SCORE. Okay, so you'll have all the content. And if you have further questions, Theresa's email address is on there, and we're happy to connect.
Yeah, great information. Thank you so much.
Move forward in case you wanted to capture my email again. That's right there.
Perfect. Thanks, Theresa. Okay. Do we have any other questions? All right. I think we're good. Okay. Well, thank you so much. This was great information. I don't know if anybody else has dual monitors and was like looking at their company website to be like, I think we could do better based on this information. So, but I definitely was. So thank you, Kelly and Theresa. Everybody watch for that email in your inbox in the next few days. That'll have the link to the recording, the handouts, the link to the white paper, and you can reach out to Theresa if you have additional questions. Charlie, anything to add?
No, I don't. Thank you both so much.
Okay, thank you guys. Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
all. Thank you.